All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of Level Up Mental Health. I'm your host here with Swizz. We got a good topic here tonight. It's going to be a theoretical concept related to mental health here. Um, so we'll kind of dive right in. This used to be a theory back in the 60s, according to just a little research I did beforehand, in regards to about particular trauma responses. And the theory is called the Triune Brain, and it's known now as kind of like the frontal cortex, or the frontal kind of brain, midbrain, and the hindbrain, essentially. But what we're going to look at is kind of more of a neuroscience-y look at in terms of how our brain operates when we're experiencing intense kind of trauma and stress. Um, as we all know, right, when that happens, our body kind of resorts into that fight or flight response. But what's interesting is more so of not to follow this theory to a T. It's more so just kind of understanding how our brain is going to operate, and just kind of a preface this with all that. Obviously, I'm a therapist and not neuroscience, so they're the experts here. But it's important to understand too about what our body and what our brain is doing when we are experiencing kind of an intense stress, especially if we're perceiving things to be a crisis, right? And how we're going to respond that way. So let's just kind of take a look at this theory here, and we'll see how it will play a part into, again, being able to handle stress, trauma, all that nature. So let's pull up the worksheet here, and here we are with the triune brain. So, like I said, this worksheet here doesn't give too much particular history associated with it, but just again, the little that I looked at, it's an outdated procedure now, but essentially the triune brain relates to uh, where kind of the parts of our brain are involved when we are experiencing a trauma or stressful event that's kind of going on. The theory kind of stated that it broke down into different kind of areas of the I'm probably gonna mispronounce all these, neo-mammalian part of the brain, paleo-mammalian, and the reptilian brain. So the forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, and more English kind of or more proper enunciations here. But essentially, what it's trying to kind of talk about here is what are if we look at these different parts of the brain, we can be able to understand how they are going to respond in particular trauma responses, right? So first things first, in regards to the frontal lobe, this is the kind of executive functioning part of the brain, right? Where we're being able to kind of make these decisions, the thinking part of the brain where that's kind of going on, especially when you look at animals outside of human beings. A lot of the part of that brain that is really just kind of smaller compared to us as humans is that front brain, right? Where that executive functioning occurs, the kind of the really theoretical concepts of thinkings, all that's kind of related to that frontal lobe there. Um, and then we get to the midbrain area, which relates to kind of the emotions, imaginations, dreams, rewards, kind of pleasures and pain. Is really just kind of that aspect of the brain where that's kind of related, like the thalamus. The hippocampus is kind of in there as well. Understanding kind of that part as we dive into kind of what it's going to respond to stress. And then the last part is the hindbrain, where there's the kind of the survival, the breathing, kind of the essential functionings. Without that part of the brain, we would not be able to survive, right? And even right here with the cerebellum relates to even just kind of balance. But this whole area is very vital. And, even kind of learning about the brain too, you can understand as to why this kind of the more ancient part is more at the bottom here to protect all this, right? Because the top up here is to protect all this down here, because without this, we wouldn't be able to survive, right? So that's where a lot of this kind of has expanded with our brains here to ensure that we can get to that part of having kind of the executive function, because we have the bigger parts of the brain up here. So how does this relate to stress? Well, when you look at here, if you can kind of make the connection, you can understand that obviously if this front part is related to being able to make those decisions when we're experiencing a stress or a crisis. That part of the brain, you might think to yourself, well, why is it not, activated? Like, I could just kind of respond in that situation. But your body is registering, your brain is processing that event as that particular crisis, right? So think of just kind of your brain as a filter system in that sense as well. When an experience happens, it gets filtered through kind of your frontal, part of the brain. Not saying like literally, but just kind of when an experience happens, your brain's kind of processing how it is, and can that problem or concern be resolved using that front brain, right? Now, if something becomes more intense, it gets to that second part of the brain, the midbrain. And does it say, is there any way we can utilize kind of this part, the dreams, rewards, pleasure, pains, to be able to solve the problem? And then finally, the last part is it's too big of a crisis, very intense, that we have to resort to our fight or flight responses there, right? So when that happens, if we are perceiving something to be a threat, we're automatically going to jump right into that kind of that fight or flight response, that hidden brain aspect, because again, our body's interpreting the situation that, hey, we're going to die if we don't do something here. That's kind of how our brains are responding in that sense. So we need to do something to survive, right? At the end of the day, that's what our brain's trying to do. Their brain is trying to survive and make these kind of shortcuts here to make sure that we're able to survive, right? So with all that said and done, it's important to kind of recognize that you wouldn't be able to, if let's say kind of post-traumatic stress, right? If you experience a trigger that's kind of going on, but it's not the actual kind of stressor event, it can get processed as that intense crisis, and it automatically is going to activate that fight or flight response, bypassing the executive functioning, the kind of the processing and the emotions, right into that survival aspect, right? So again, this theory here too about the triune brain is not as kind of mainstay in that sense, because essentially you could say that the brain is adaptive, right? Obviously, if we kind of are learning and developing the skills, we can kind of work our way to do this. This isn't going to be, this once this happens and it'll never kind of recover in that sense, right? Our brain can adapt to manage these things, right? But it's a good way to kind of look at, again, the aspect of what happens when a crisis does occur, right? So the related kind of theme and discussion relates to the trauma responses. What's interesting here, there's 5 kind of main ones to review, and a lot that you may be familiar with. We have the fight, flight, freeze are the 3 common ones, and then we have submit and attach. So submit is being able to kind of give in that sense, right? The stressor is too intense that you have to, acquiesce and just be able to just kind of submit to whatever that particular stressor is. And the last one here is that attach. So being able to, connect with someone to make that survival, right? You experience an intense stressor, so you're going to need to be able to be involved around with someone. So obviously, again, with a lot of these trauma responses, the fight flight are pretty, and freeze, the stressor is too intense, you don't know what to do, so you're freezing. Flight, just kind of running away, whatever it is, even related to thoughts or avoidance, right? Avoidance is a big thing related to flight. And then fight, kind of confrontational, physical, even obviously, but a lot of it's kind of related to that protection, right? All these things is going to be related to protection for our body to make sure that the stress that we're experiencing is not catastrophic to ourselves, right? We want to make sure that we're able to be safe, and that's what our brain's telling us. So again, like I said, it's an interesting conversation and just way to kind of think about how our brain operates. And that's the ultimate goal, right? The more we're able to understand ourselves and our brain and how it operates, the better we will be at being able to counter those difficult experiences, especially again if it's an intense trauma or intense triggering of those particular symptoms. The more we're able to learn and understand and really just kind of be proactive about it, the better we are at being able to reduce the intensity. So think about kind of what your fight and flight response is, especially if you feel it is activated. Think about, again, kind of the impact it has on your ability to use that logical thinking, right? Is the executive functioning kind of limited or disabled at this point due to the experience the intensity of the stress that you're experiencing, right? And ask yourself too, again, what is kind of your trauma response, and how can I be able to manage that? I have a lot of kind of good resources here. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thanks for checking out this video. Hope to see you in the next one.